Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman, an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman from California. Clerk will report. Point of order reserved by the gentleman.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a
Objection,
substitute.
the amendment will be considered as read.
I object, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee report for the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Merrick B. Garland in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with the subpoena duly issued by the Committee on the Judiciary offered by Mr. Swalwell of California on page 6 at the end of the paragraph that begins, quote, to further the committee's constitutionally mandated oversight and legislative duties, end quote, insert a new sentence which reads, quote, however, taking into account that multiple members of this committee, including the chairman, remain out of compliance with subpoenas issued to them by another committee of the House of Representatives, no member of Congress will be permitted to vote to hold any other person in contempt of Congress until such time as they provide the testimony that has been required of them regarding their participation in the planning and execution of the events that took place on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, end quote.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment plainly says that if you have not responded to your own subpoena, you can't bring a subpoena or seek compliance upon anyone else. In the law, we call it the unclean hands doctrine or the clean hands doctrine. It's a legal principle in common law that prevents a party from receiving relief from a court if they have acted unethically or unjustly in relation to the matter at hand. At our own home, it's called the wash your hands before dinner doctrine. And my 6-year-old and 5-year-old and 2-year-old, they're not coming to the dinner table until they themselves have clean hands. There are dirty hands on the other side. Multiple times, 2 members of this committee have been asked to comply with a subpoena related to January 6th. One of those members, I don't think is here today. I think he's up watching Mr. Trump's trial. But most simply, don't come at us about anyone else's compliance if you are out of compliance. And the chairman is 735 days, 17 hours, 19 minutes, and 24 seconds out of compliance of his own subpoena. And so this amendment would prohibit the chairman or anyone else from bringing compliance or contempt upon somebody for another matter. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Point of order being withdrawn. Gentleman from Virginia.
Speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the chairman and I thank the gentleman for his remarks. I've heard them a couple times. And in responding, I would just say that, first of all, the subpoenas for the members of this committee are no longer in effect because the last Congress has finished. We'll just make that point first. But we also want to look at the responses that were made by the chairman to the January 6th committee. The chairman never declined to testify. The chairman, in fact, wrote every time he was asked to testify and responded with further requests for either statements or further requests for responses from the committee, and never received any responses from the committee. Never expressed an unwillingness to testify. So the characterization that he refused is inaccurate. And it's clear that Democrats were subpoenaing Republicans for political reasons at the time. Chairman Thompson stated that he pursued these subpoenas in part to, quote, weaken Republicans if they took the majority in the future. And so we see through the political motivations of those who issued the subpoenas to begin with and those who want to make it a political point now. So I oppose the amendment and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my colleague from Virginia, yes, we've had this discussion before, but just a couple quick things to clarify the points you just made. The first was, yes, there was an exchange of correspondence between the chairman and the committee. The problem was the chairman made, in my view, demands that were unusual, to say the least, in response to a subpoena. Like, tell me how you're going to use the information and give me the information that you have about that's related to my testimony in advance of me coming. In other words, he wanted discovery before he showed up to give the statement. Now, let's compare that to what we've got before us with respect to the Department of Justice. And in this particular instance, not only has there been substantial compliance with respect to, I wish I had it in front of me, the number of subpoenas and document requests, and I remember it's 92,000 pages of documents. I think it's like 40 witnesses from the Department of Justice. And as I mentioned earlier, some of those witnesses were prosecutors in, mid-investigation who the department still produced for statements and transcripts here before the committee, which I think is totally inappropriate and actually potentially interferes with the legitimate prosecution efforts by the Department of Justice, ironically in one instance with respect to Hunter Biden. So, let's be clear about that piece. And then, as I mentioned earlier today, if we're going to stay on the substantial compliance standpoint, just in this particular request, there was a report generated by Mr. Herr that the department was not required to turn over, but Mr. Garland decided to turn it over anyway on his own initiative. With respect to the transcript, again, there's no statutory requirement that he turned that over, but he did turn it over. And he made Mr. Herr available to testify. And Mr. Herr, he resigned right before he gave the testimony, which was fine. But it's clear that the department was not trying to block him providing testimony to this committee. So from the standpoint of substantial compliance, this is an outstanding record for the Department of Justice. Now, I won't go into the contrasting point that Mr. Swalwell made. I think he laid it out pretty good. But let's be clear about this. The compliance we've had here, I think, has been really extraordinary. The executive privilege claim, which was raised by the department, again, really has not been addressed, certainly not on the legal merits by the Republicans in this committee. And as I mentioned earlier today, I have a letter that was dated May 1, 2019 from the Bar Justice Department to Mr. Nadler, who was the chairman at the time, raising basically most of the same points that we're talking about today. Now, with respect to the chilling effect issue, which you all sort of poo-pooed a few minutes ago, similar access by the department could be impeded in future investigations if the White House were given reasons to believe that Congress would receive each and every document shared with the department. Now, this is Barr's department objecting to turning over documents where there was no predicate provided already. In this instance, you've got the transcripts. You just want additional information. As Mr. Swalwell said, apparently, you'll never get enough. And then the Bar Department of Justice said the committee has not articulated any legitimate legislative purpose for its request for all of the special counsel's investigative files. This is for the Mueller report. The committee has no legitimate role in demanding law enforcement materials with the aim of simply duplicating a criminal inquiry. Now here, the Merrick Garland Justice Department gave you the transcript, gave you the report, gave you the lawyers to testify about what they'd done. Barr objected to all of it with respect to the Mueller report, raised the same sorts of issues. Now, those have been addressed in a different forum. But here, you guys are ignoring the compliance that's been provided by the Department of Justice over and over and over again. I'm running out of time, but my point here is that you've got substantial compliance from the Department of Justice. Mr. Chairman, the record is what it is. I think we've discussed it before on multiple occasions, and Mr. Swalwell's raised it as well. But I think it's a contrast that bears noting in this particular instance, especially where we're seeking contempt against the Attorney General of the United States. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia for unanimous consent.
Ask unanimous consent to insert into the record 3 letters from you to Chairman Thompson dated January 9th, 2022, May 25th, 2022, and June 9th, 2022.
Without objection. Who seeks recognition? Question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Recorded vote, please.
Gentleman asked for a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Gates?
Thanks, Ben.
Mr. Biggs? Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Bishop? Ms. Sparts? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Bentz? Mr. Bentz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore?